Hello and welcome to today's live stream. So it's Sunday afternoon and we're back at this again. So today is an English lesson. So today we're going to be looking at the writer's toolkit. So I'm going to be giving you tips and tricks as to how to write better and gain further marks in your writing. So thank you for everyone joining me on YouTube. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and consider joining the Patreon in the link below. In the Patreon you will be receiving this full lesson, so for everybody watching on Patreon, thank you very much. In the full lesson, I will be going over 3 key tips and tricks to maximise those marks in your writing exams. But then we will also be going through a bespoke worksheet where we will be adapting sentences, words, paragraphs, and upscaling them using the tools that we're learning to get today to make them much better. So we'll be putting the skills into further practice. For those on YouTube, you will just be watching me talk through the theory of this and talk through the skills, and we'll go through a few examples. But if you want to work through the bespoke worksheet with me, you'll need to join the Patreon, where you can also download that worksheet. Okay, so thank you very much for sticking with me through that long intro. We're now going to get started. So everybody, if you could grab a pen and a piece of paper or a notepad, we will get going. So the first tool in your writer's toolbox that we're going to be talking about today is vocabulary. So vocabulary is so important. What we need to make sure we're doing is using the most interesting words that we know. Now, there's no quick fix to improving your vocabulary. The only thing I can really tell you is that you need to read. So it's really important to implement healthy habits in our life. We want to make sure that we're eating fruit. We want to make sure we're getting enough sleep. We want to make sure that maybe we're doing a little bit of exercise every day. But we also probably want to make sure that we're doing about 20 to 25 minutes of reading every day. And the reason for that is because reading, regardless of what you read, really, obviously you want to be reading at your level and perhaps slightly above, so that the vocabulary you're reading in those texts is a little bit more advanced than you're used to, so you're learning. Whatever you're reading will implicitly sort of go into your head, so you'll be learning implicitly rather than explicitly. So you don't need lists and lists and lists of vocabulary. Some people like to write out these lists, put them in a vocabulary book, copy them out every day. That's a much more long-winded version of learning vocabulary. Really, you just have to expose yourself to more sophisticated vocabulary. So yes, that can come from reading, but it can also come from watching certain television shows, videos on YouTube, even on TikTok, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend that because it's so fast moving that it's really hard to assess quality on services like that. But if you're watching things like documentaries, quality films that have been quality checked, interesting drama series that obviously age appropriate but also mature in terms of the way that the actors and the characters communicate with one another. And when I say mature, I do not mean inappropriate. I simply mean that they're not using simple vocab. It's not designed for children. It's designed for adults, but it's appropriate. So I don't want you to go and consuming a load of like horror films or anything like that, but make sure that you're watching things that are going to challenge you, challenge your understanding of the world, and challenge your vocabulary as well. So, although there is no easy fix, what I will encourage you to do is to be very mindful of your vocabulary when you're writing, because quite often when we write, our brain wants the quickest route, and that will happen with anything. Our brain wants the quickest route to something and wants the easiest route, so it will go for the word it's most familiar with, which is what your brain finds the easiest. But I want you to start questioning the words you're using and whether in fact you do know more sophisticated and interesting words. You're just not using them enough, and therefore they're not coming to you quickly. And so the more often you do use those words, the quicker they're going to stick, or the better they're going to stick, rather. And one way you can do that is when you practice your writing, you write with a thesaurus. So a thesaurus is a type of dictionary where if you look up your word, it will give you a load of synonyms. So synonyms are really good way. See, I could have used a better word than good there. They're a fantastic, exceptional, sophisticated and ambitious way of testing your vocabulary. So you think of a word that you're going to use, consider that perhaps I could use a better word there. You look your word up and you find a whole host of other words that you could use. Okay. So these days it's very difficult to find thesauruses. Physical ones, you might find them in school. So if you're in school and practicing your writing, absolutely make any use of thesauruses that your teacher might have in the classroom or any that are in the library. But you can also get digital ones. So we often look at thesauruses on websites, thesaurus.com. Any dictionary websites such as Oxford, Cambridge will have thesauruses. I've just downloaded a really simple thesaurus on my computer here, which is what this blue window is here. And so I'll just show you an example. If I let's put in the word good, just to see what comes up. So, obviously, good is quite a vague word. It can be used in lots of different contexts. So, good could mean like a good amount of something. So I might say, oh, I've got a good amount of apples, so full. Okay. Estimable, honourable, respectable, beneficial, just. So it could be right. So good could mean a moral thing. It could mean a useful thing. So all of these are actually more specific, and you'll find that when you're trying to increase your vocabulary, that actually the word you're using can be used in so many different contexts, and what you want to get is really context specific. So you want to find words that really mean a specific thing so that you can communicate exactly what you're trying to say. Dependable, safe, secure, right, effective, unspoilt. But what I would like you to do is just find a good example of a thesaurus for yourself. So let me just find one on the internet that I can show you that's going to be maybe slightly better than this one. This is better. So I'm on thesaurus.com. Okay. I'm just going to put you there. So as an example, if I put good into thesaurus.com, I get lots and lots of different ones, and you can see thesaurus.com is really good because actually what it does is it shows you the strongest ones, some strong ones, and then slightly weaker ones which are perhaps less specific. So wonderful, pleasing, congenial, deluxe, Jake, that's quite a colloquial one. Let's say one more word. Let's say I want to talk about run. I want to run somewhere. I could break, race, rush, spurt, amble, bound, canter, dart, dash. So there's all sorts of different words to use. And the reason this is helpful is because it's more engaging to vary your vocabulary, because each of those words means something ever slightly different. It's really hard to define because that's almost outside of our language, because we can only define them by the words themselves. So it does build a bigger picture though for that reader, and a more interesting, varied picture. Also, if you keep repeating words, that's really boring. So the examiner is definitely going to be giving you marks for varying your vocabulary, but also just choosing the best word you can. So having a sophisticated vocabulary is really crucial to gaining those good marks there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write just a couple of sentences with some really boring vocabulary, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to allow you to have a go first, upscaling it to be better with some better vocab. But I'm going to show you afterwards what maybe I would choose, and I might use this thesaurus to do that. And we're just going to see how much better a sentence sounds with more interesting vocab. Okay, so I'm going to go on here. I'm going to pop this behind now. There we go. So let's say, for example, I write the sentence: the boy walked outside and saw a car drive down the road. Okay, just one sentence actually. That's a really, really, really boring sentence. So I'm going to give you just a minute on your own. I want you to try and make it better. You might just choose one word that you're going to improve upon. You might add words in. So remember, if I've not described something enough, add more detail in. Add some adjectives in there where I've not put them. Or you might choose to change a load of words or add a load of words in. Okay. So I'm just going to give you a minute now on your own, and then we will go through this together and then see what we could do. Okay, let's have a look. So first of all, I'm just going to identify where perhaps I could add stuff in. So here, for example, I could describe this boy. I've not given him any adjectives or any defining features. I'm also going to add, so actually in there, I'm just going to write adjective. That's where I could definitely add something, right? I also haven't described how he's walked. So there's definitely an opportunity for an adverb there. Also, opportunity for an adjective for the car, for an adverb here, and an adjective for the road here. So there are always room. You don't have to do it with every noun or every verb. Because in actual fact, if you do too much of that, that might sound clunky as well. But there are always room for extra adjectives or adverbs if you've not added them in. Beyond that, I'm also going to highlight words that are I could make more interesting. So he's not just going to walk outside. He's going to do something more interesting than that. He's not just going to see it. The car's not just going to drive. And the road isn't going to just be a road. It's going to be a bit more interesting than that. So let's think. Okay, I want this boy to be frightened. So let's go back to my thesaurus. I'm going to put scared back in there. Find the most interesting word. Panicked. Okay. So, the panicked boy. Now, he's not just going to walk. Let's put walk in here. It's got to kind of link to the fact he's scared as well. Haste. Okay. So the panicked boy, paced. It's got to be fast. So let's see. Quickly. What adverb we could use? Expeditiously. I'm going to say promptly, just because then we've got some onomatopoeia. Okay. We've got panicked, paced, and promptly. Promptly. Packed. Panicked. The panicked boy paced promptly. Outside. Oh, no, I don't mean to do that. Go away. Outside and... Right, he's not just going to see it. What other word could we use other than saw? As a verb. So that's the noun source. That's the tool. We want the verb. Not giving me the verb, so let's go see. Okay, the present tense version. Detected. That's quite good. Because he's like, you can imagine when you're panicked, you're scanning for stuff, right? So he has detected now the car is going to be like threatening in some way. So I'm literally just going to chuck threatening in there. Threatening. The apocalyptic car. Can't imagine what an apocalyptic car might look like. Somehow a car that's showing the end of the world. Detected an apocalyptic car. Drive. No, it's going to drive like erratically, which is quite a good word anyway. But I'll just see what else I can do. Erratically, carelessly, capriciously, let's just go for erratically. Sometimes you don't have to upscale it if you already know good words. So down the road is going to be like beaten down kind of road. So let's go for like ruined. The desolated. There we go. The desolated. Or the desolate, I think. Because it sounds like it's empty. Everyone's gone the desolate road. There we go. Right, let me just move that so you can see it. So, I'm going to read the first one and then read the second one back to back, and you can see just what vocabulary can do. The boy walked outside and saw a car drive down the road. The panicked boy paced promptly outside and detected an apocalyptic car drive erratically down the desolate road. Yeah. In fact, we were going to change road, weren't we? Let's just do one more. I'm thinking highway, maybe. Road. Highway, yeah. Track. Track sounds more like it's empty. Let's go track. So it's more context appropriate, you see. Desolate track. There we go. So the panicked boy paced promptly outside and detected an apocalyptic car drive erratically down the desolate track. So it's a much better sentence. It also gives us much more information on what that story or what that description might be about. We've got a much better idea of tone, atmosphere, suggestions of what might happen, questions we have. From the first one, we don't really know anything. Okay, so just changing the vocab can inform the reader so much more and give them a much more full story or description to be reading. Okay, great, well done. Right, so now we're going to have a look at sentence structure. So this is all kind of like technical, structural stuff, but it's all really important in terms of creating those brilliant pieces of writing. So it's not all about language techniques. It's about, yes, the language in terms of vocab, but also the punctuation, the sentence structure. It's really crucial to making this writing engaging. So we're just going to have a look now at different types of sentences. So I have a description for each of these. I'm going to go through them one by one, and every time I go through them, I'm going to write a version almost of the same sentence, but with that structure, and you can kind of see how varying it might be interesting. Or in fact, we might come up with a description that we're going to create, and each type of sentence will add to it, but because they will be varied in structure, we can then put them all together, and you'll see how it'll be an actually really interesting piece of description. So let's just think of something we could describe. We might describe a beach at sunset. Okay, that's what we're going to go for. So the first kind of sentence that we have is a simple sentence. Now, a simple sentence isn't just simple in that there's not a lot in it necessarily. It's just that it's one independent clause, and by an independent clause, I mean a clause that makes sense on its own. So something like, I cried. Okay, grammatically, that makes sense on its own. You're not waiting for me to tell you any more information. If I said, when I was younger, that's not independent because you're anticipating me saying something else. That's what we call a subordinate or a dependent clause, in that it depends on another clause in order to make grammatical sense. So it's one independent clause. Now, to be an independent clause, it needs to have a subject. Subject is the thing or the person doing the action in the sentence, and it has to have a verb. So in the sentence, I cried, I is the subject, and cried is the verb. So that's all it needs. It needs to have a purpose, so clarity, impact, or pace. It creates purpose, really. And an example is the sky darkened. But I'm going to write one about a beach at sunset. So, the waves washed on the shore. Now you might say, well, that's not as simple as I cried. What that's got is an object. So a simple sentence can still have an object. In fact, you could argue that's technically complex because I could have said on the shore the waves washed. Let's make it just an object rather than on the shore. So the waves washed my feet. So I'm stood on the beach. The waves washed my feet. So that's one clause, makes sense on its own. and it's just a subject, a verb, and an object. The object is what the actions, the thing the action is doing to. So like if I threw a ball over the fence is the fence. Over the side of the fence is my object. I threw a ball at the bottle. The bottle is the object. I am the subject because I'm doing the action. That was confusing, but I think we got there. Compound sentences. So compound sentences have two independent clauses and they're joined by a coordinating conjunction. Coordinating conjunction is just a connecting word that connects the two together. So like and, but, so. Okay, those are our simple examples. The purpose is to balance or contrast between ideas. An example, she revised all night, but she still felt nervous. So the reason that this is compound is because she still felt nervous and she revised all night are both independent clauses. They make sense on their own. They could be two independent sentences, but the choice to put a coordinating conjunction between them and make them one sentence makes the writing and the reading flow slightly differently and therefore adds variation and interest there. So I might say sand nestled between my toes, but I stood still. So I stood. Okay. So I stood still and sand nestled between my toes. Two independent clauses put together by the coordinating conjunction but. Complex sentence. So this is where subordinate clauses come in, or dependent clauses. So we have one independent clause, one or more subordinate clause, but just for the sake of argument, we'll just use one. So it's one thing that makes sense on its own and one thing that doesn't. Okay, and the subordinate clause can sit either at the beginning of the sentence or at the end. If it's at the beginning, it requires a comma after it. If it's at the end, it doesn't. Just bear in mind with those compound sentences, you always put a comma before a coordinating conjunction that's joining two independent clauses. That's just a note there. But with a complex sentence, you only need a comma if the subordinate clause is at the beginning. So, for example, with this one, although it was raining, they continued the match. Now, that could be they continued the match although it was raining. If it was that way around, you wouldn't need the comma. So we just need the comma to create that pause that you naturally would when you're speaking. Right, so I'm going to continue my beach thing then. When I looked up, I could see the clouds parting. Okay? So it could be I could see the clouds parting when I looked up. Wouldn't need a comma, but because I put when I looked up at the beginning, it does. A minor sentence. So they could be called fragmented sentences. So they're incomplete grammatically. They don't technically make grammatical sense, but if you can pepper them in every now and again, you're never going to get marked down for that. It actually adds voice and interest. It's not something to do all the time because there would be no cohesion with your writing. Your writing wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. But every now and again, they can be used for impact. So they're used for emphasis, tone, or to create stylistic flair. So an example would be no way, too late, oh no, an example would be darker still. Like, it doesn't make sense on its own, but it's normally just two words or even just one word, and it's there to create impact. So I could see the clouds parting. I might say slowly, or hope. Just the word hope. Okay, the clouds are parted. I'm imagining the sun coming out. I'm just going to say hope. I don't need to say there is hope. I can say that, but just every now and again I can just stick in a word or two words, and it just creates an interesting feeling. And as long as the sentences around them make sense, it's absolutely fine. We then have a compound complex sentence, which is just kind of combining the two that we already looked at up there. So it's at least two independent clauses with one or more subordinate clause. And it is sophisticated because it's very difficult to do this. I wouldn't necessarily recommend trying to do this all the time because it can get confusing. But the example they've got here is, she smiled when he arrived, but her eyes were still red. So that is complex because the first clause has an independent and a subordinate clause. She smiled when he arrived. So it could be, when he arrived, she smiled. That would be your complex sentence there if you put the subordinate at the beginning. Because when he arrived doesn't make sense on its own, but she smiled does. And then we have a second independent clause afterwards, but her eyes were still red. So it could be, she smiled, but her eyes were still red. But it's, she smiled when he arrived, but her eyes were still red. So we've got a bit more information there. So I might say, the sun peered down as I closed my eyes, and it warmed my whole body. Okay? So the first bit has an independent clause and a subordinate clause. The sun peered down as I closed my eyes. As I closed my eyes is subordinate. The sun peered down is independent. Then I have a second clause which is independent, and it warmed my whole body, to have two independent clauses. One sentence paragraph. This is very similar to the minor sentences, and actually I could argue they're very similar. I might actually just take that away. But you can imagine that hope could be its own paragraph, right? Just break a paragraph, write one thing, go to the next. It creates structural interest. And it suggests a shift in tone as well. Something dramatic has happened, and then we're moving on. Okay. And the last one is a fronted adverbial, which we've kind of used already with a lot of these subordinate and complex sentences. So it's a great sentence type to add your students' toolkit. To add to your toolkit is the fronted adverbial sentence. So it's when a sentence begins with an adverbial phrase, which is a chunk of information that tells us when, where, how, or why something happens. So it's to do with adverbs, how something is happening. It sets the scene or adds context before the main clause kicks in. So before sunrise, the mechanic rolled up the garage door. With a loud screech, the tyre skidded across the tarmac. Despite the rain, he continued working under the bonnet. So I might say something here like, as the sun set, I stretched my arms and yawned. Okay. So that's actually really just kind of a complex sentence, but it's a form of complex sentence in that we call that a fronted adverbial. Right, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste all of the sentences I've got here and put them in one paragraph so you can see how they kind of all fit together and how it makes it nice and interesting to vary your sentence structure. Because what we don't want to be doing is starting sentences with the same word all the time and the same structure, because it just becomes really, really dull. Okay, ready? So, the waves washed my feet. Sand nestled between my toes, but I stood still. When I looked up, I could see the clouds parting. Hope. The sun peered down as I closed my eyes, and it warmed my whole body. As the sun set, I stretched my arms and yawned. So you can see there, not a single sentence begins with the same. Actually, these two both begin with the. But what can often happen is all of your sentences start to begin with the, and it gets so dull. The boy did this, the sun did this, the water did this, the. So by changing your sentence structures as often as you can, you stop that repetition of sentence beginnings, which creates it just makes your writing sound too simplistic. So adding those sentence variety is really important. Okay, lovely. Right, so last tool in the toolbox today is punctuation. So punctuation is really important. To get it right, we want to get punctuation right because then we can guarantee some marks. But we also, for our spelling and grammar, but we also want to make it interesting. So it's not just if you wrote a whole piece of writing and all of the punctuation was accurate, but all you used were full stops and commas, you wouldn't get full marks for that. You wouldn't even get half marks for that because it's boring. Nobody wants to read something where it's just full stops and commas. Okay, so we need to be able to push ourselves and use more sophisticated punctuation, such as dashes, brackets, semicolons, etc. So we need to know how they work, how to use them. And we also need to make sure we've got the nuts and bolts down with the commas, because you'd be surprised how many people, and not just young people, how many full-grown adults do not know how to use a comma, and it infuriates me. So we need to make sure we're using commas correctly, okay? Otherwise, we're going to lose unnecessary marks for something that should be nice and simple for us. So I'm just going to give you a minute now, actually, just to run through as many different punctuation marks as you can remember. Just name them, maybe write down the symbol, and then I will list them, check if you missed any, and we'll then go through each of them, how you should use them, and I'll give you an example as well. So just a minute now, just to brainstorm as many as you can. Okay, let's have a little look then. So, I'll make this writing bigger actually. So you have a comma, which looks like this. We have a full stop, which looks like this. We have an exclamation mark. We have a question mark. We have we have brackets. We have a colon. We have a semicolon. We have dashes. And I believe that's it. I'm forgetting any. We've got apostrophes and stuff. Let's put in apostrophe. Apostrophe is never really used for effect, but apostrophe is definitely used to for accuracy. So we definitely need it for accuracy. And I think we will leave that there. Okay. Right, so a comma. Do we know how to use a comma? There's actually 2 ways to use a comma. 3 ways to use a comma. Apologies. So I'll write down all 3 ways to use a comma. So to separate an independent clause from a subordinate, so it might be a good idea to write this down as you go so you've got these notes. From a subordinate clause, when the subordinate clause is at the beginning. So we did that earlier. So when I say, although I'm not hungry, I still ate dinner. Although I'm not hungry is my subordinate clause, which I'm putting at the beginning, which I then need to use a comma to separate it from the independent clause of I still ate dinner. The other reason it's used is for parenthesis. Now, parenthesis, we can use commas, brackets, or dashes here, and parenthesis is when you have an extra clause in the middle of a sentence that if you scoop it out, the sentence will still make sense on its own. Okay, the parenthesis, which is an additional clause in the middle of a sentence that would still make sense without it. So I'll show you how this all works in a minute. And then obviously commas we also use for lists. Okay, so for each of these I'm just going to write an example. So let's write when I was 7 my mum bought me a book. Really boring sentence. But when I was 7 is subordinate. My mum bought me a book is independent, and so I've separated it there with my comma. Parenthesis. Simon walked to school, although he usually caught the bus. With his friends. School, so he could chat with his friends. So Simon walked to school. I've actually put dashes there. There you go. I don't need to put dashes though. I can put commas. So that's another. It doesn't really matter there as long as you vary it a little bit. So Simon walked to school so he could chat with his friends is a sentence that makes sense on its own. But I've added an extra subordinate clause in the middle, which I can separate either side with parenthesis commas. So parenthetical commas. Simon walked to school, although he usually caught the bus, so he could chat with his friends. Okay, so it's like an aside. Okay, a list. This morning I walked the dog, I went to the bank, and I visited my grandma. So we do not need to put a comma before the and when it's at the end of a list. You do that, actually you would here. Let's change this list. I walked this morning I ate a banana, an apple, and an orange. So when the part of the information after the coordinating conjunction is not an independent clause, you do not need a comma. So at the end of a list like this, you don't need a comma. With the other one, we would have used a comma, and that was because I visited grandma is also an independent clause and therefore would need the Oxford comma before that and. But we don't need to worry about that too much. But the commas come between the elements of the list, but not at the end where we just put an and. Okay? Right, a full stop. We know how to use a full stop. Anytime a sentence ends, we put a full stop. So this is a full sentence, and therefore the full stop comes at the end. Nice and easy, that one. Exclamation mark, very similar. Comes at the end of a sentence. but it comes at the end of an exclamative sentence. So a sentence that you want to add drama to. It's very loud, potentially it's very dramatic. So she jumped off the tallest diving board. The exclamation mark shows that I'm shocked at that. Okay. Question mark, again, comes at the end of a sentence, but only a sentence. That's a question. So we all know what question words might be. How, when, why, who, what. Okay, so what is your favourite colour? That requires a question mark at the end. Brackets. Now, brackets can be used parenthetically. Okay, so I can put that here. It can also be used for parenthesis. So, for example, foxes are very sneaky, particularly with particularly in chicken coops, and are likely, well, particularly in parks, and are likely to steal your food. So foxes are very sneaky and are likely to steal your food. Makes sense on its own. Particularly in parks is an extra piece of information, a subordinate clause. I put in parenthesis using brackets this time. Doesn't matter whether it's brackets, commas, or dashes, just to add information. Brackets can also add extra information at the end of a sentence. So, adding extra information at the end of a sentence. If I'm moving too fast here, please feel free to pause it and rewind, etc., so you can make notes on this if you need to. Thomas was bored in the meeting, which had gone on for an hour. That could be a comma there, which had gone on for an hour. Or yeah, I think actually brackets works really well there. So it's an extra piece of information at the end of the sentence. Okay, colon. Colon will introduce a list or extra information about the thing you're talking about. Introduces a list or further information about a topic. So let's say I want to go hiking. An activity exclusively for cool people. So I'm explaining what hiking is. It's almost like a definition. So like in a dictionary, you might have the word and then a colon. You don't tend to, but it's like I'm going to tell you more about this thing I've just brought up. But if it was a list, it might be like, I brought lunch today. I have a sandwich, a chocolate bar, and an apple. So, and then saying, oh, here's the list. Here's the thing that I'm about to tell you about. Okay, I know I'm rushing through, but do feel free to pause and go back. It's just because we're getting on in time a little bit, and I want to get onto that worksheet for those on Patreon. So a semicolon can be used in two different ways. A semicolon can also be used for a list. I'm going to put a longer list. A longer list that also includes commas. But it can also be used to separate two independent clauses about the same topic. So, let's say, for example, I say Dylan likes climbing, rowing, and running. Claire likes sleeping, chatting, and drinking coffee. And I like none of these things. So I've got two lists within a list. So it's almost like a semicolon is there to separate lists within lists. If my first part of my list includes commas and has got more elements to the list, I separate the bigger parts of my list with semicolons. The other one is the two independent clauses thing. So this could be that my two independent clauses could be two separate sentences and be separated by a full stop. Grammatically, there's nothing wrong with that. But if we want to be more interesting and sophisticated with our punctuation, we separate it with a semicolon. So, for example, I might say that the weather is so hot today, semicolon, I can't stop sweating. Now that's kind of a compound sentence, right? Because I could have said, the weather is so hot today and I can't stop sweating. That's a compound sentence. Two independent clauses linked with a coordinating conjunction. But instead, I've gone for semicolon instead of my conjunction. So the semicolon sits in as a conjunction. You can just say one thing after the other. It's like two separate sentences. But because it's a semicolon, it's more interesting on the page and it shows that I understand that these two things are very, very closely linked in topic. Okay, dashes. So a dash, again, can be used for parenthesis. So it's exactly the same purpose. So I might say that football is an exciting sport, although slightly dangerous, for everyone involved. So football is an exciting sport for everyone involved, makes sense on its own, but I've added my parenthetical clause in the middle, although slightly dangerous, which can be taken out if needed. A dash can also be used to add an extra clause at the end of a sentence for dramatic effect. Now, this clause may be independent or subordinate, it doesn't matter, but it's there to create effect, and the dash creates an extra long pause for that tension and effect to take place. So I might say something like, Tom climbed to the very top of the mountain. His foot slipped on the edge. So I've got an independent clause, sentence, Tom climbed to the very top of the mountain. Pause, his foot slipped on the edge. That's there to create a tension, a drama. It could be a frightening drama, it could be an exciting drama, whatever it might be. It's an extra bit of information that really just changes the tone quite a bit. Okay? And last one, apostrophe. So there's two types of apostrophes. This is quite a boring one. We don't do this in any particular exciting way. We either call it an apostrophe of contraction or an apostrophe of possession. Apostrophe of contraction puts two words together, which are technically two separate words, but we shorten them and we replace vowels within them with apostrophes. So, for example, do not, don't, I am, I'm. So those kind of words. Possession is when it belongs to someone. So I might say that the girl's shoe fell off. The shoe belongs to her, to the girl, so therefore I put an apostrophe there. If it's plural, if all the girls' shoes fell off, I put the apostrophe at the end, after the plural word. Shoes fell off. If it's a name with an S on the end, you put an extra apostrophe and an extra S. It's not the same as plural. So if I said Thomas's shoe fell off, I have to add an extra S and put an apostrophe between them, essentially. Okay, there you have it. So those are punctuation marks. If you're using those and using them in variation, and using as many different ones as possible, you're going to get marks for sophisticated punctuation, and that's going to make your writing all the more engaging. Because punctuation can change meaning as well, which is really important to note. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody who is joining me on YouTube. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and consider joining the Patreon in the link below, where you'll be able to watch the rest of this lesson now. So for those on Patreon, we are going to continue and work through this bespoke worksheet which I've created, which is the Writer's Workshop, which is kind of based on a garage. We're going to do some MOT tests on our writing. Okay, so everyone on YouTube, thank you for joining me. Look forward to seeing you next time.